All right, John chapter 2. We are in our second week of a series called Signposts to Jesus, and it's based on the Gospel of John. So when John wrote his Gospel, he specifically included stories that would all be signs to point to who Jesus was, what Jesus did. Basically, at the end of the book, he says, I've written these things so you might believe on Jesus as the Son of God, and that you might find life in his name. And so the things he wrote, the signs he wrote, were all somehow pointing to Jesus and what he came to do. So we're just looking at the seven of these signs, 7 of the signposts in the book of John, and we're on number 2, cleansing the temple. So I'm going to read verses 13 through 22. You can follow along as I read, starting verse 13. Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And he found in the temple those who sold oxen and sheep and doves, and the money changers doing business. When he had made a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple, with the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money, and overturned the tables. And he said to those who sold doves, take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise. Then his disciples remembered that it was written, zeal for your house has eaten me up. So the Jews answered and said to him, what sign do you show to us, since you do these things? Jesus answered and said to them, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Then the Jews said, it's taken 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days? But he was speaking of the temple of his body. Therefore, when he had risen from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this to them, for they believed the scripture and the word which Jesus had said. Let's go to the Lord and ask him to guide us as we study his word. Father, thank you again for the chance to read your word and study it together. We thank you for your Holy Spirit who is around us and indwells in us as Christians. And I pray that your Spirit who inspired this word will now teach it to us and apply it to our lives. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. It's no question that religion is under attack in America. True? Religion is under attack in America. Organized religion, we should say, is under attack in religion. Statistics say that every day more and more people leave any form of organized religion. People are leaving churches and other sorts of religions too. And many people are just claiming to be nuns or non-religious, not N-U-N-S, N-O-N-E-S. They're claiming to be without any religion. Yet, at the same time, people claim to be more spiritual than ever. It's weird. Now, one of these people who was part of a church and has since left. Her name is Ariana Grande. Anybody know the name Ariana Grande? She is one of the most well-known singers today. She's about, I think she just turned 30 years old. She's extremely talented. She's a singer, an actress, dancer, and has a lot of people who like her music and has a following. 6 years ago, she wrote a song and published a song called God is a Woman. And later she said the song is not actually about God, it's about the power of womanhood. And so she says it's not really about God, it's about women's liberation and power. But because of the title, she got a lot of interviews and a lot of questions about her religious faith, because she titled the song God is a Woman. And so in one of those interviews, I have a clip of the interview. Where the interviewer asks her about her past religious faith. And I just want you to hear what she says, because I think she's symbolic of a lot of people in our culture today. So hopefully it'll play for us on the TV here.
Was religion a part of your life growing
It
up?
was, yeah. I like went to Catholic school. It was like so funny and like no, it's not funny. It's like, you know, you're raised. I'm Italian. I went to Catholic church. She's Italian. Yeah, I learned. I went to class. I did the Sunday church thing, and I think it was the Pope at the time was like totally homophobic and totally not a fan of women at all. Or like also like SpongeBob or Harry Potter, and I was like, this, I can't do this. I was like, I'm out, guys, I can't do it. And I just became more spiritual because it didn't feel like something that, and a lot of people do, like it obviously, like it resonates with them and it helps them through, you know, but I just feel like I'm not a very religious person. So I became more spiritual, and here I am.
So she has an interesting line there. She said, I'm not a religious person, so I became more spiritual. I left religion so I could become more spiritual. And for many of us who have grown up in a church setting, that just seems weird. Like how do you, if you stop being part of any sort of organized faith, how are you more spiritual? Yet for many people, especially the younger generations, millennial and Gen Y, you know, that statement makes complete sense to them. Because for many people, spirituality can be completely disconnected to any sort of organized religious faith. That people think, oh, I can be spiritual. So basically, here's how I would put it. People treat God like a clothing store. You can go and buy a shirt, and if you don't like it, you can return it and get another one. Or you can go to a completely different store. Maybe buy your shirt at one store and pants at another store and make your own eclectic look. And that's how they treat the Bible and religion. I'll pick a little bit from this and a little bit from that and a little bit from that and make my own customized faith. The problem with that is if that is the way to do it, there must not be any true faith. Because if there's any truth out there, you can't just pick and choose what you want and make your own, right? But if nothing's actually true, if everything is just whatever makes you feel good, then that's kind of the attitude, that's kind of the mindset. I can just be spiritual because it makes me feel better, not because it's actually true, it just makes me feel better. So people like Ariana, and I don't want to pick on her because she's just representative of a lot of people, have this view of spirituality. Jesus encountered people who also had spirituality that was kind of out of whack, kind of unbalanced, we could say. Although for a lot of people Jesus was dealing with, they were very religious, but not very spiritual. You see? That they did all the religious stuff, they did all the requirements, they did all the stuff that they were supposed to do, but they weren't very spiritual. And so we find Jesus here at the temple, and he is interacting with people whose religion was out of whack, whose religion was messed up. So the big idea is, here's what I want you to get. The big idea is this. True spirituality is focused, not fuzzy. True spirituality is focused, not fuzzy. Kids, Mr. BJ is there. He's ready for you if you want to go with him. You don't have to, but if you want to, you can. We got handouts. Do you have the rest of the bulletins? Randy, if anybody that does not have a handout for today, anybody that needs one. So in the bulletin, in that handout, we have notes. And here's the first thing you could put. True spirituality is focused, not fuzzy. So like in the video we saw of Ariana Grande, what she was saying was that her spirituality, her view of the Catholic Church had gotten so fuzzy, she didn't want to do that anymore. So she was going to create her own spirituality. But what I would say is there's a lot of spirituality that is just simply fuzzy spirituality. I'll get to that in a minute here. But first, let's get to the setting. So in John chapter 2, verse 1, John chapter 2, verse 13. I wrote the wrong number there. 13, it is the Passover time. It says, now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. So Passover was one of the main religious events of the Jewish calendar. It was potentially the biggest of all of them as far as numbers. Because every Jewish male was expected to go to Jerusalem and offer a sacrifice at the temple. He might bring his family too, might not, but the Jewish males were supposed to go to Jerusalem and offer a sacrifice as worship on Passover. So therefore you had lots of faithful Jewish people from all over Israel and the other parts of the Roman world who would travel to Jerusalem for Passover weekend. Some say there may have been as many as 1 million people that passed through Jerusalem during Passover weekend. It was a hugely busy time. Now, an essential part of Passover was offering an animal sacrifice, often a lamb, sometimes a bird or a goat, or even an oxen. That they had different animals they would use. But if you were traveling to Jerusalem, especially a distance, it was difficult to bring the animals with you. Like, for one thing, the animal was supposed to be in perfect condition. And if you brought it on a long 50-mile journey, it's likely to fall and get injured or gets brushed up or scratched up or even get attacked by a wild animal or something like that. And there's a lot of danger of bringing your own animals in addition to the inconvenience. So the Jewish leaders came up with this perfect plan. The plan was, people can just bring their money and we'll sell them an animal when they get here. Sounds like a good idea. And so the sacrificial animal sale business was a huge business in Jerusalem around Passover time. You know, in Luke chapter 2, when the shepherds saw the angel announcing Jesus and they were watching over their flocks by night, at flocks out in the field, it's assumed that those sheep may have been sheep which were being raised to sell for temple sacrifices at Passover time. So this is a huge business that extended even beyond Jerusalem into Bethlehem and Nazareth and, I'm sure other little cities around there. The problem was not that animals were sold in Jerusalem. The problem was where these animals were being sold. They were being sold inside the actual temple facility. And so here's the picture. Jesus walks into the temple. He walks into the gates of this place that's supposed to be set aside for the worship of God, and he sees a flea market. He sees a zoo. He sees animals everywhere. And not animals that are being led to the sacrifice, animals that are in cages and birds in pens, and there's like goats and sheep and oxen. And imagine how much noise that would be, you know? If I'm studying at home and one of my dogs runs in my room, I'm distracted. I can't focus when they run in and out. Imagine going into church, or the temple for them, and you're surrounded by bleating goats and sheep and mooing cows and fluttering birds and merchants who are yelling for the next customer, oh, over here, I got some sheep over here. And just the craziness, the flea market. If you're going to a flea market, it'd be exciting. But if you're going to pray, it's not going to work very well. And so Jesus goes into the temple that was supposed to be a place of prayer, and he finds a flea market, and it upsets him. Now, he also sees something called money changers there. Now, here's the deal. The temple only accepted certain kinds of currency. The main currency of the day was the Roman coins, and that's what everybody in the Roman world used. However, there was a coin that was minted in the city of Tyre. It was called Tyrrhenian coins, and it was a much more pure, valuable coin. And so, for many years, the temple only accepted Tyrrhenian coins. Why? Because they're more valuable. Tyrrhenian coins were 93% silver, Roman coins were 80% silver. So they accepted the more valuable coins because they wanted the pure, more valuable currency. Okay? But then Rome shut down the mint in Tyre. When they did that, the temple leaders petitioned the Romans to allow them to mint their own Tyrrhenian coins. So they did. The Romans said, yeah, you can do it as long as you only mint it the same way with the same image. I have a picture of Tyrrhenian coins that have been found by archaeologists. This is what they look like. And so the Jewish temple leaders had their own printing press, their own minting coins. So it was Tyrrhenian coins. The only place they accepted them was the temple, so it was essentially temple money now. Okay, so if you had Roman currency and you wanted to come and buy anything at the temple, you had to exchange your Roman currency for temple money. Also, there was a temple tax. Imagine having to pay a fee to get into church. You had to pay a tax before you were allowed to worship at the temple. And so, but they only accepted their own currency as temple tax. So you had to go to the money changers to exchange your money for temple money. And then you could use that temple money to pay the tax and to buy any animals you needed. Well, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the accounts of the cleansing of the temple there, they indicate that these money changers were being dishonest, that they were using unfair exchange rates. Like, you give me $1 of Roman money, you give me $5 of Roman money, we'll give you $1 of temple money in exchange. And people had to do it because it was the only way to fulfill your worship. And so you can see how messed up things had gotten, and how people were just using the system to make money and to kind of cheat people out who were honestly coming to try to worship, and they were just cheating them out of stuff. And so Jesus comes in, and Jesus is upset. He's angry. We can understand why he'd be angry. I mean, this is his Father's house. He is God the Son, and this is where God the Father is supposed to be worshipped. Like the one main place where God the Father is supposed to be worshipped. And he walks in to his dad's house, and it's a zoo. And it's people that are robbing other people. And it makes Jesus angry. And so we see this story where he cleanses the temple. He gets a whip and flips the tables and scatters the money and casts out all the animals and casts the merchants out. And he says, my house shall be a house, or my Father's house shall be a house of merchandise, not be a house of merchandise. I'm messing up the text. My Father's house shall not be a house of merchandise. Now, you may not realize this, but did you know Jesus cleansed the temple twice? 2 occasions. This was the first one. At the beginning of his ministry, he cleansed the temple. But then Matthew, Mark, and Luke record a different time at the end of Jesus' ministry, after his triumphal entry, where he went into the temple and did it again. And we know it's different partly because different things happen. For one thing, Jesus said something different. In the second time, he says, my Father's house shall be called a house of prayer, but you made it a den of thieves. In this one, he says, my Father's house is not a house of merchandise. So he says something different. Plus, there's a different reaction. In this story, the Jewish leaders are confused, and they come and question him, like, what authority do you have to do this? The second time, when he does it, the Jewish authorities are getting together to plot his death. They're like, we're done with this. This guy's got to die. And so Jesus cleansed the temple twice, at the beginning of his ministry and at the end of this ministry. And this is the first one. Our big idea, true spirituality is focused, not fuzzy. I want to talk about fuzzy spirituality and then focused spirituality, okay? And what we see in the text about that. So fuzzy spirituality is first. I've heard it explained before. Maybe you've heard this too. I've heard it explained that the reason Jesus cleansed the temple was because they were buying and selling inside the walls of the church or inside the walls of the temple. And people will say, that's why we shouldn't buy or sell anything inside the church building, because Jesus cast out the money changers. And they'll take it so far to say, if a church has a bookstore in their church, then that's a sin. Or if the church sells t-shirts before after church, it's a sin. I don't think that's what Jesus is doing here. I don't think he's condemning sales of anything. He's condemning the fact that this was disrupting the worship of God. That what was happening was making it so people couldn't pray. That making people couldn't worship. Now I want to show you a picture of the a diagram of what the temple may have looked like based on archaeological stuff. It's also in your bulletin. But you might see here, in the middle is the main temple area where the sacrifices would happen and all the worship stuff would happen. And then outside, there's big courtyards. And here and way over there is called the Court of the Gentiles. They were kind of segregated in their worship. Jewish males could go all the way to the main worship area. The Jewish women could only go as far as this area right here. But any Gentiles had to stay in the courtyard. They couldn't come any further. So there were Gentiles who believed in the God of Israel, put their faith in the God of Israel, wanted to worship the God of Israel, came and paid the temple tax, probably brought a sacrifice and everything. But because of their ethnicity, they weren't allowed in any farther than the courtyard. So, where do you think all these animals were being sold? The only place is the court of the Gentiles. And so all this flea market stuff, all this money changing was happening in the only place where Gentiles were permitted to worship. The only place they were even allowed to pray was where they had set up all this consumerism and all this hubbub and all these animals and all this stuff. You can see why Jesus is angry. Jesus isn't angry just because they had animals they were helping people to purchase. He was angry because this was hindering people from worshiping. It was stopping people from being able to worship. And apparently the Jewish leaders didn't care as long as they got their money. In our worship times, we try to eliminate as many distractions as we can. We ask people to turn their cell phones on silent, which sometimes doesn't happen, but and we ask people to not bring their lunch in and eat it during the service, and we have air conditioning so it's comfortable enough, and we have padding on the seats. We try to eliminate distractions so people can worship. Imagine if we had so many people here, we had to have an overflow. We had to go out to the building back there and broadcast the service out there because there were so many in here. Some people had to worship out there. And imagine we also sent all the kids over there, and the kids are running around and playing during the service. And imagine also we were selling T-shirts, and we had people over there with tables, and they're trying to sell T-shirts, and they're popping popcorn and selling hot dogs. People in here might be able to worship, but the people out there wouldn't be able to, right? Too many distractions. All these Gentile people who loved God and wanted to worship Him were not being allowed to worship because of all that was going on. So, you can't completely eliminate distractions. You can't eliminate all distractions. So that's why I believe every person who wants to come to worship has to come with the right focus. The right focus. Not a fuzzy focus, but the right focus. There's a couple things that I think were going on in the Jewish mindset that caused a fuzzy focus. And these are two things that also can cause problems in churches today and in Christians' lives today who want to be spiritual, but it gets fuzzy. Two things. First is what we're going to call fuzzy focus pragmatism. Fuzzy focus pragmatism. That's a big word. You know what pragmatism means? Pragmatism just means doing what works. Doing what works. In the business world, if they want to be pragmatic, they're going to put their best products out front because those are the ones that sell the best. If you're an influencer on social media, you're going to do whatever you have to do to get likes and to get follows. That's pragmatism. Doing what works, doing what gets attention, doing what gets likes. So in business, this is a common thing. But it's a problem in churches because sometimes churches will do whatever gets people in the door, whether or not it actually helps them worship. Or they'll do whatever they have to do to get people in the door, whether or not it's actually biblical or even actually right. Let me give you an example. There was a men's conference this past week at a big church. I'll keep details I won't give too many details because I don't want to criticize other churches, but this men's conference was happening. You can find this on YouTube. Men's conference was happening, and they had an opening act to kind of kick off the event, where this guy was swallowing a sword and then climbing up a pole with a sword in his mouth and doing like this dance on a pole. Now, that might seem a little weird, you know. I mean, swallowing a sword, that's kind of interesting, kind of gross. But here's where it was a little bit iffy. The guy they brought in to do this was a former male stripper who was also a pole dancer. Now, he claims he's become a Christian and he doesn't strip anymore. He just does pole dancing for, you know, other stuff. But they, for some reason, the guy, the pastor who's in charge of this event, we'll call him Pastor John, he thought it was good to bring in this guy as the opening act. Now, I don't know how it was received by the men at this conference. It was probably just, you know, at best a little weird. But then the next day, one of the guest speakers got up at that conference, and he, I saw it on YouTube. He was trying to be gentle and trying to be tactful, but he was criticizing that opening act, basically saying this was not appropriate to be in a church. This was not appropriate to start off a worship time. This shouldn't have happened. Well, as he's up there gently criticizing this, he gets kicked off the stage by the pastor who's in charge. Pastor kicks him off, like, you're done. You're not speaking here anymore. Because he criticized something that he felt was not appropriate for worship. Well, it's become this big issue. And I kind of follow church news, and there's been this big blow up over this, back and forth. That's all I'm going to say about that. But why did they bring this guy in the first place? Probably because he thought it would work to get attention. Even if it was iffy, even if it was questionable, even if maybe this guy wasn't the best person to put up front, they thought, oh, it'll work. It'll get attention. It'll make people excited. That's pragmatism. Pragmatism can cause spirituality to become unfocused and fuzzy. I had some students, I teach journalism. It's one of the classes I teach at Westwood. And we take pictures, and some of my students went out and took a whole bunch of pictures of classes, and they came back and all the pictures were blurry. Every one of them was blurry. And I was like, what happened? And they're like, I don't know. We pushed down the focus thing like normal, and everything was blurry. And so I checked the camera and realized on the lens, there was a switch that changed from automatic focus to manual focus. And they had it switched to manual focus. Not realizing when they do that, they have to actually turn the lens and focus it. They're just taking pictures and everyone is blurry and they're just going along with it. When life gets out of focus, it makes things difficult in life. Don't you wish you had an autofocus on life, where you could just push a button and all your problems became clear? Like you could just, boom, oh, now I see the issue, now I see the problem. But it doesn't work like that. So often, life is blurry, and sometimes the things we do can cause spirituality to become blurry. So pragmatism is one of those. The other one, and by the way, in the temple, why did they allow all these animals into the temple? I think it's because they were like, it just is easier that way. It just works easier that way. And the Gentiles, if they can't worship, whatever, they're just Gentiles. But it's so much more convenient to have them in the temple where people can just walk in, exchange their money, buy it, go do their sacrifice. They weren't focused on worship, were they? They were focused on getting the job done. They were focused on going through the motions of doing a sacrifice and getting people in and out as fast as possible. Another thing that causes fuzzy focus is tradition. Tradition can cause fuzzy focus. Tradition is that we do what we've always done because we've always done it. Even if it doesn't make sense anymore. We've always done it this way, so that's what we're going to do. Tradition isn't necessarily a bad thing. Everybody has traditions. Every church has traditions. But it can be a problem when it interferes with worship, when it interferes with spirituality, when it interferes with, what people really need to grow. The worshipers in Jesus' day probably overlooked all of this going on in the courts. Why? Because it had been going on for years. It's how we always do it. Yeah, it's messed up. Yeah, it's not right. Yeah, whatever. But it's just how it is. It's just how we do things. And this tradition can cause a fuzzy focus. This past week I heard of a pastor who, true story, he pastors a small church, and his church is a King James only church, so they only use the King James Version. His deacons have, as far as I know, they have told him he's not permitted to use any other version even at home, even in his own study. He's not allowed to use any other version of the Bible. Even with his kids, he can't use any other version of the Bible. Which weird thing is, the hypocritical thing is, those deacons at home use other versions themselves. But they said the pastor can't. And here's why they said. They said, because if people in the church find out you do that, they might stop giving tithes. And then we won't have as much money. And so therefore, pastor, you're going to be restricted from what Bibles you can read from. That's like overly tradition, isn't it? Like people will get upset if you do something that doesn't go along with what they think is best. And probably in Jesus' day, these Jewish leaders were like, hey, we're doing a service for people. It's right for them to offer sacrifices. It's right for them to do this. And so why change what's working? It's working. It's our tradition. It's how it's been for years and years. Let's not change it. But Jesus comes in. Jesus comes in, and Jesus wants to get things back into focus. So, secondly, focused spirituality. We see it here. Jesus is trying to bring some focus back to their spirituality. Two things that can help us with focused spirituality. One is to be focused on the right attitude. On the right attitude. In verse 17, we read that the disciples, when they saw this happen, they remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house has eaten me up." Now that's a quote from Psalm 69. In that psalm, King David is talking about the troubles he went through, but where he found encouragement. And he says about himself, he says, "Zeal for your house, God, has eaten me up." In other words, I am so passionate for the worship of God. It's like it's burning within me. It's like it's eating me up. I really, really want to worship God. And that was part of why David was called a man after God's own heart. Now, Jesus is a type of David. He's kind of a symbolic of David later. And when he did this, the disciples were like, "Oh, wow, he's just like David. Zeal for your house has eaten me up." Look at the attitude he has toward worship. Look at the zeal. We don't see that zeal in anybody else here. Everybody else is just going through the motions. But look at Jesus. Look how passionate he is for the worship. Look at that zeal. Don't you want to have that kind of zeal too? Don't you want to have that kind of attitude toward worship like Jesus did? Attitude makes a difference, doesn't it? Pam and I have had some issues with our insurance company not paying bills. You ever have that problem where insurance doesn't want to pay bills? And this is health insurance, and we have to call and refile things. And this insurance company, it seems like every time we call them, they just give us the runaround. You know the feeling? Just give us the runaround, and they're like, "Oh, yeah. And they act like they don't know what they're doing, and we have to explain everything. And it's just so frustrating, because it feels like they don't even want to answer the phone, like they don't even want to be there. And then yesterday, we called the same insurance company again and got this lady who was so helpful. So helpful. Like, she knew exactly what to do. She was right on top of it. When we were done with the conversation, I said, "I think, ma'am, you are the most intuitive and helpful person we've ever talked to from your company." And she laughed. She was like, "Oh, thank you, honey, thank you." And I hope it made her feel a little better about her day. But it was true that attitude made a difference. She came at the call with the right attitude. And it made a huge difference for all of us. What happens when people come to church with the right attitude? It makes a difference, right? I get to be the person up front, so I get to see everybody. And sometimes I see things, and I'm like, I don't know. Like if I see somebody like this the whole time, the whole service, you know, if you see somebody, does it feel like they come with the right attitude? Not really. Or if somebody comes, they put their head down and just start sleeping through. You know, does it feel like they've come to church with the right attitude? No, but I mean, what I see is what I'm seeing right now. I see people who are engaged in the Word, people who are here because they want to be here, people who are here because they want to worship, and that's awesome. That's awesome. So it's when we come with the right attitude, it makes such a difference. There's this lady who is a teacher at Westwood, where I teach. And she is near retirement age. I don't know exactly how old she is, but let's say near retirement age. And she's been teaching for about 10 years. She's a very conservative lady. Like, if you can think of a religiously conservative person, that's her. Her music, very conservative. Whenever she wants her kids to do a song in chapel, it's always like a song from the 1960s that she sang when she was a kid. She would prefer to sing hymns over anything else. But the music we do in chapel is a lot more upbeat, a lot more modern, the music that we do in chapel. And I never really thought about this before, but I looked down one day while I'm up there helping to lead music, and I saw her, and she's with a bunch of sixth graders, and she was standing, she was like singing at the top of her lungs with a big smile on her face. And I thought, at that moment, this lady doesn't even like these songs. She doesn't even like this style of music. Yet there she is, worshiping God with the top of her voice, even though it's not her style, even though she doesn't like it. And I thought, that shows her heart for Jesus. That even though it's something she would rather not do, she's going to do it because we're singing songs about her Lord. And if it's about her Lord, she's going to sing it anyway. And I really appreciate that. She's actually out on medical leave right now, so if you think about it, pray for her. Her name is Linda. Pray for her. But I really appreciate her and her attitude toward worship, even though it's something that wouldn't normally be her style. Be focused on the right attitude. In January, BJ got to go and attend church with my brother's church, with his cousins, my aunt and uncle, or his aunt and uncle, my brother. And when he came back, I said to him, what do you think of their church? And this is his description. This is in inner city Baltimore. He said that what impacted him the most, he said, those people, you can tell they really come to worship God. They really come to church because they want to worship God, and you can just see that and feel that when they come. And I'm like, what a great testimony of a church. Like, isn't that the great testimony of the church, that you can just see that people there love Jesus and want to worship Him? Focused spirituality is focused on the right attitude. And lastly, focused spirituality is focused on the right person. The right person. We're talking about the person of Jesus. See, Jesus was surrounded by people who had faulty beliefs, faulty ideas. They were stuck in their old traditions, they're stuck in their old ways. Spirituality had become nothing but routine and ritual. Jesus was there to change everything. When He cast out the animals, He actually literally temporarily interrupted the sacrificial system for maybe a half hour or an hour, whatever it took to get those animals back. He temporarily interrupted it, but that was symbolically, Jesus was saying, I'm here to interrupt this whole thing. I'm here to change this entire thing. In verse 18, the leaders come to Him and ask Him, they say, by what sign do you show us to do these things? In other words, they're saying, who gives you the authority to do this? Like, seriously, dude, who gave you the authority to go and tip over these tables and cast these people out? What is the sign that says you have authority? And here's the sign Jesus said. He said, destroy this temple, and in 3 days, I'll raise it back up. I would love to see their faces when he said that. Like, what? Destroy the temple? It took years to build this thing. What are you talking about? There's no way anybody can rebuild it in 3 days. Now, why would we destroy it in the first place? This is the place of worship. Why? But John gives a footnote. He says that Jesus was using foreshadowing. Foreshadowing is a hint of what is to come. And John doesn't make us guess. John just says it right here. He says Jesus was talking about his own body. His own body being the real temple. His own body being what was going to be destroyed. And 3 days later, he would raise it back to life. And John says, after Jesus rose from the dead, his disciples remembered what he said, and they believed on him. So here, Jesus is giving a sign. Remember, it's about signs? He's giving a sign not only of his authority over spirituality, but a sign that he was the one that you needed to follow to have true, focused spirituality. See, spirituality is not just mix and match whatever you want. It's not going to the spiritual clothing store and buying this and that. If you want true spirituality, it's got to be focused on the right person. That's what Jesus says. On the right person. Now, some people would say, well, Jesus was just leaving one religion to start another religion. He's just starting a new religion, one of many religions. That's all he was doing. But you know, the Christian faith is different from every other religion. The Christian faith is unique. Let me tell you one way the Christian faith is unique. Every other system of belief, every other religion, basically says this: here is the way for you to find God. Here's what you have to do to find God. Or here's what you have to do to find enlightenment. Or here's what you have to do to reach nirvana. Or here's what you have to do to reach paradise. Or here's what you have to do to make God happy with you. Or here's what you have to do to have inner peace. That's what they all say. Well, here's what you have to do. Only the Christian faith says it's not what you do. Here's God who came to you. Here's God who left his throne to come to earth. Here's the Son of God who gave his own life for people who are sinners. Here's God coming into your life. Not that you have to do this and this to reach God, but God left and came to you. That's how the Christian faith is unique and different from every other religion. God came to us. God did the work in coming to us to save us, to rescue us. And all we have to do is recognize him. All we have to do is receive him. Receive that gift. There's nothing in Christian faith that says you have to follow these steps before you can be saved. You have to do this and do this and do this and do this and do this, and then maybe you're worthy of salvation. None of that. It's a free gift that Jesus came to offer anyone who receives, anyone who says, yes, I will follow the right person. I'm going to follow Jesus because he did the work for me. He did the work on my behalf. You know, thinking back to Ariana Grande and the video we watched at the beginning, I think she, even when she was in the Catholic Church, she probably had fuzzy spirituality. I don't think she ever had clear spirituality. And it was only natural for her to leave the Catholic Church and to make her own version of fuzzy spirituality. It was only natural. And I really hope that God will focus her life and she can see Jesus for who he is. May that be true of all of us. As we go to our invitation time, here's what I want us to think about. First, are we focused on the right person? Are you focused on Jesus as the hope that you have? Are you focused on the right person? And secondly, if you are, then do you come to him with the right attitude? Because you can be focused on the right person, but still approach spirituality and approach worship with the wrong attitude. So are we focused on the right person? And are we focused on the right attitude? That's what I want us to think about. Would you bow your heads? Take a moment to talk to God about this.